Good morning to everybody. Welcome to the kickoff lecture of the Monnet module of Digital Citizenship for EU. This is our first lecture of this Monnet module co-financed by the European Commission and taught by me and my colleagues Luca and Germano and Cristiana Carletti. This is our first day of lectures and lessons, and for this reason we decided to organize a kickoff lecture with two very well-known guests, linked and related to the topic of our Monnet module. Our Monnet module has as main topic the citizenship. The citizenship that in this period is under a deep reconfiguration. A deep reconfiguration triggered by several reasons. Moreover, this reconfiguration has to be placed in the framework of the European process of integration, which result in significant new outcomes to the citizenship. From our point of view, and this is our goal with this module that is very, very multidisciplinary, because in this module are involved researchers and professors experienced and skilled in law, in political science, and international law. The idea of this module is to investigate citizenship at least through two different drivers. The political drivers and the market driver. The political driver and the market driver. Why? Because it's clear from our point of view that there is a new way to perform to decline the political participation of every citizen in consideration of the new media, the new internet opportunities, the new online opportunities. And for this reason, today we will listen the keynote speech of Luigi Ceccarini, who I thanks, coming from Urbino Carlo Bo University, who is the author of a very interesting book about the digital citizenship from a political point of view. But I will give Luigi the floor in a few minutes. From another point of view, we have to consider that in the framework of the European process of integration, the citizen is also a citizen of a market, a single market which has its own values, its own rights, a market which is regulated. In the regulation of this market, a pivotal, a focal point is played, a focal role is played by the European Commission. And also for this reason, we have the other guest that I thank you again, who is the Antonio Parenti, the European Commission representation in Italy head. He managed the representation of the European Commission in Italy since a few months, and we are particularly happy to have him talking about the value of European citizenship on online profiles. So I would like to not to lose too much time in my very short presentation, and for this reason I give immediately the floor to my colleague Luca Germano for a short introduction on Luigi Ceccarini keynote speech. Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raffaele. It's a great pleasure for us to host Luigi Ceccarini today and to kick off our course on digital citizenship for EU with his keynote speech. and probably doesn't need any introduction, but just in case, let me tell you something about him. Luigi is full professor of politics and head of the School of Political and Social Science at the University of Urbino Carlo Bo. He coordinates the research activities of Laboratory of Political and Social Studies, La Polis, a very well-known laboratory at Italian level, and is co-editor of an important journal of political communication that is called Compol. The main focus of Luigi's research is the relationship between society and politics, new forms of civic and political participation, electoral behavior, generation, political culture, and transformation, of course, of representative democracy. On these topics, Luigi has been publishing widely in prestigious national and international venues. And Luigi presents today, of course, is precious since he is an expert on the subject of digital citizenship. His latest book, published a few days ago by Edward Elgar, is titled The Digital Citizenship, Politics and Democracy in the Network Society. Here he explored multiple and contested meaning of citizenship in the 21st century as representative democracy faces mounting crisis in the wake of digital age, and tries to answer to the difficult question on what does it mean today to be citizens in the globalized world of internet age. I stop here and give the floor to Luigi. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you to my colleague, Professor Torino, and then also Carletti, Luca, Germano, that we usually meet around Europe during PSA annual meeting or somewhere else in Italy too. And thanks for this invitation to Claudia Mariotti, which is a very good friend, and she was also a colleague at the University of Urbino some years ago. I'm very happy to be here today, very proud, and then I want to thank Roma 3 for this invitation, because this is my first presentation, so it is like a run trial for this book that is just published by this international publisher, and I haven't received yet any copy of the book, but I bought one in the ebook version. And let me say first that this book is not a new one in some sense, because shall I okay, can you see this slide?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so as you can see here, you can see the cover of the book just published, the one that Luca Germano just mentioned, The Digital Citizenship, Politics and Democracy in the Network Society. But in 2015, I wrote a book for Il Mulino publisher in Italian, and the title was La cittadinanza online. So I revised that book. It's not just a translation, but I updated that book that I published 5 years ago, and where I tried to adapt the content of the book for an international reader, for using new data, because this is not a research book, as we will see, but there are some data in order to frame the problem of the citizenship and the transformation of the citizenship, thanks to the digitalization of our society, our everyday life. So it is not just a translation, but it was updated and adapted to this international audience. And What is, I think, interesting of this book is that there is a mix between classical issues, classical concepts that I tried to contaminate with new literature, with new arguments, with new literature. This is another important point, because the book I wrote in 2015 seems that I wrote this many, many years ago, because in the meanwhile, many other books, many other literature has been published by scholars which are specialists of political communication, digital political communication, digital participation, new forms of participation, and also the one who have taught over this concept that actually citizenship is a very old, in some sense, a very classical concept, but is at the same time how can I say, in progress concept, like democracy otherwise. So what is my starting point? My starting point is, as you can see in the subtitle, is democracy. Democracy, representative democracy, is now challenged. And many things are changing about democracy, and many other elements which are connected, linked to democracy, like political culture. Political culture is changing. And when political culture is changing, also the way people, citizens, participate is changing. The public sphere, for example. This is another interesting and classical concept. I refer to Jürgen Habermas. But the public sphere is the place of the public debate. What does it mean today to talk about public sphere in a digitalized world? So there are many, many different phenomena that are stressing, to use a fancy word, are stressing democracy, and in particular representative democracy. Try to think, for example, to the generational turnover. Young people that are new citizens, they have a completely different political culture. They have been socialized in a different scenario, political scenario. And then we have now also the pressure made by the technological development. The media ecosystem is changed, completely changed. Now we live in a digital age. And what we do every day to get information using our smartphone, for example, or using digital television, or using podcasts, for example, or watching streaming TV or something like that. So there are so many different phenomena that influence the idea and the concept of citizenship. And citizens, I want to stress, of course, in the political dimension of cultural dimension of this political issue. Citizens now have a different approach towards politics. We live in a post-ideological era, and this has to do with the classical, the traditional actors of politics, like political parties. So all of these have very strong, very deep repercussions on the way how citizens become part of the community, of their community, the community in which they live, in which they belong to, their own political community, their own societies, their own political realm in which they live. So to look out at citizenship means also to study how society is changing. It's like a proxy, I would say. So studying, as Germano said, I used to study, for example, electoral behavior. But to study electoral behavior means also to study how people is changing, how citizens are changing. Of course, technology is very important. It's very important for our everyday life, for our political participation, but also culture, as I said before, and then socialization is fundamental in this perspective, and it affects also the idea of the common good, how to take responsibility for these elements, which has to do with our everyday life. And of course, I want to stress this word, which is not new at all, but is very important for me, as already has highlighted Germano. Of course, I'm very, very interested in a key word, that is participation. Participation in a wide sense, I would say, because participation means to be part, means to take part. So participation is the way how citizens are part of different polities, because there is the local polity, the town hall, and then the city where you live, and then where you can behave as a citizen, but we are also part of the national polity, Italia, for example. But like in your course, in your module, also Europe, for example, is another important polity, and how citizens behave, how citizens look at the European institutions and how they participate to this. It's very important to study in order to have an idea how citizenship and then participation is changing. So the frame is completely changed over the last decades. Some scholars talks about the idea of post-representative politics and post-representative democracy. Others, I mean, for example, Simon Tormey, or if we refer to John Keane, he talks about monitoring democracy, or he's an Australian, but other scholar like Shatson, he talks about the monitorial citizen or the monitoring citizen, and other political philosopher like Rosan Ballon, he talks about counter-democracy. So there are different scholars around the world that want to stress how our politics is changing. And to embrace the perspective of citizenship, I think it's very important, because talking about citizenship in a very wide sense, broadened sense, we have to take into consideration how people participate and how is changing participation. I'm fully aware that my work on citizenship is necessarily partial and limited, because, for example, I don't consider all the studies in law studies for framing citizenship. I used my literature that I refer to is the political science literature. So for me, participation is a fundamental concept to take into consideration, and is linked to technology, the transformation of technology. And of course, there is another important discipline that I think we have always to take into consideration, that is demography, and how new generations are changing the political life, and then the political society, culture. So it has also a culturalist approach, and of course globalization, or much better to say the processes of globalization in the plural way that are changing the role of the citizens in the political institutional frame. So the public space is in a constant transformation. I wanted to stress this on my book. Is a kind of transversal element of this study, this work, because the public space is I would define this a kind of ever-changing world, because the public space is the effect of the citizens who live inside this field, in this realm. And also the main protagonists of this space are changing. Try to think political parties, for example. Political parties are very, very important actors for the mediation and for the representation, which are basic words for democracy. But they have changed completely. We are now talking about digital parties, micro parties, pop-up parties, where the frame is a post-ideological frame. These parties are defined as cartel parties, so far away from the society. This means that there is more room, more space for rethinking participation, for rethinking how to be part of the community, a way that is completely different from the traditional phase of the so-called golden age of the party, that I'm not sure if there was really a golden age of the party, but it is something very different from the past. But not just political actors like political parties or other intermediate bodies like unions or churches or big organizations, social-political organizations. But I think that we have to take into consideration also citizens, men and women, and in particular their identities, because participation changes according to the identities of the people, and the way how they use resources, political resources, technology, information. We live in a society where there is an abundance of information, or all the innovations in the field of democracy. So democratic innovations is very important in order to include. Inclusion is another important word for this for my work, and so we have to consider how these resources are used to be present in the public space. So the main question, the basic question is, how can citizen be good citizen in the digital era, in the networked society? I tried to give an answer to this question using producing actually this book and revisiting this book in the light of the new literature, and research outcome that during the last years have been published by scholars. As you can see, I have, so the articulation of this book is made by 7 chapters, of course, the introduction, and 7 chapters, and the introduction and the first chapter are free access, so if you like, you can download it by the website of the Elgar Edwards publisher. And what is, I think, important is to stress, what time is it? Just for 5 minutes on the first one, in the background. The background, why is so important this, in my view, of course, this chapter? Because I try to sketch, I try to outline the scenario using in this first chapter. I try to discuss many different elements that are strictly connected to my central concept, the citizenship, and how it has changed the norms of citizenship, and then the way how people participate. I brought 13, if I'm not wrong, paragraph in this first chapter that are then exploded in the following chapters. So citizenship, identity, and political community, where you can find also basic elements of the traditional literature, mixed with the new perspective and the new reflections on this concept. Secondly, citizens, how they have changed, the aligned and critical. So I think citizens are not just the aligned, are not just detached, but are also critical. They have the possibility, thanks to, for example, digital resources, to can you hear me? Because I saw
Yes.
a phone call from Rome. I thought there was a problem in my presentation, so that's fine. So the second chapter, the third chapter wants to give a profile of the nowadays citizen, the aligned, but not just the aligned, detached, but not just detached. There is not just the disenchantment about politics, but there is also a critical approach that can use digital resources in order to affect politics, influence politics, to say something about politics at local level, but also at global level. And then I wanted also to stress on the idea of participation in the fourth chapter, in the frame, and as you can see here, there is a reference to Colin Crouch, in the frame of the post-democracy, that gives us the idea that democracy is changing. In the book, I mentioned many scholars that they had a prefix to the democracy. For example, hybrid democracy, Diamanti, or audience democracy, Bernard Monnet, counter democracy, Rosanne Ballon, monitor democracy, John Keane. So this means that democracy is changing, and scholars are thinking about it. And the challenges towards democracy has to be taken into consideration in order to understand also many other elements which are strictly connected to democracy, like participation and citizenship. The fifth chapter is devoted to the monitorial approach, which is something that has to do with the idea of surveillance, but the monitoring approach is something that has to do with the role, the active role of the citizen, which is not just a voter. So it's not just a person who go to the ballot every 4 or 5 years, but can have a continued control, a continued monitoring approach towards politics. And then the disintermediation, this is another important element. I'm not sure if disintermediation is the right word. I would prefer to talk about re-intermediation, because there are other protagonists, other actors of the mediation. But this is very important point to which is strictly connected to the digitalization of the communication and, of course, also of the politics. So just to another 5 minutes to describe what you can find in this first chapter, because it is very important to consider these elements that I tried to sketch briefly in the paragraphs of this chapter. So, rethinking citizenship. We have to consider citizenship something live, and then something that is changing over time. When we talk about citizenship, we, of course, refer first of all to Thomas Marshall, when he, over 50s, discussed about this concept. It is a classical, a seminal book about this concept. But we have to rethink citizenship, and I enlarge this using literature, of course, considering the affective dimension of the citizenship. So that means the identity, the sense of identification. So in this sense, my approach is a culturalist approach, and that is fundamental in order to understand also the relationship between citizens and politics. And then I tried to explore another important element, that is the inclusion. Inclusion can be seen as synonymous of democracy in some sense, because democracy is based on the idea of mass politics, is based on the idea, and then of course representative democracy is based on the idea of the inclusion of citizens in the political systems. Of course, there are many important actors that can facilitate these inclusions, but political parties have changed a lot. Political parties have changed a lot over the last decades, as I have already mentioned. There is a question mark, because I don't think that political parties are dead in some sense. Political parties have changed their location, have changed their role. In the past, you remember, for example, Max Weber or Sigmund Neumann, they underlined in their definition of the mass political party the function of social integration or democratic integration. Maybe this function is now more weak than in comparison with the past, but it's very they are still very important in the functioning of the political system, even if they stimulate sentiments of disaffection, sentiments of anti-party sentiments, and but they are still important in the political system. They have changed. They have changed in terms of organization. They have changed in terms of the importance and in the role in the society. And another author which is very important for me is Bernard Monnet. He talked about audience democracy, and in the audience democracy, citizens are seen as spectators. They have a different role in comparison with the previous democracy, the so-called party democracy. So, but things are changing. Also, Bernard Monnet said that things are changing. Spectators are in some sense passive citizens, but now the digital resources can help citizens to become more active. Of course, in a different way in comparison with the past. They are more individualistic in some sense. They live and they behave in a more fragmented frame, but they have opportunity to be more engaged. Also with less cost, because to get informed today is easier than in the past. Of course, there are problems about the informative abundance. So what I want to stress in this book is the political dimension. It is very important. It is strictly linked to the new generations, the native digital generation. They socialized in a completely different environment. No bipolarization, international bipolarism. They use digital tools, digital resources in a very easy way because they were born when internet was already there, and this affects also politics, of course. And what is important about the connection between technology and democracy is, I'm referring here to Rodotà and the risk that technology makes the politics a kind of referendum democracy, because it's easier to click and to vote. But if there is just a referendum democracy without discussion, then referring to the public sphere, the traditional idea of public sphere, there is, of course, a problem, because politics is also discussion. It is also argumentation, counter and argumentation is the formation of public opinion, and so on. I'll go on quickly because it is 9:45, and I also discussed the concept of disintermediation and individualization. This is very important because mediation and representation is the basic element of democracy, but the digital transformation put in discussion these elements. And then disintermediation is something that we have to take into consideration in order to understand how politics and democracy works today. And individualization is an important process that has to do with the globalized world, the risk society, the change in the political culture, and then in the culture in a broader sense. And many authors have talked about life politics, for example, Giddens or Bennett, lifestyle politics, which means that there is individualization in our age, also in the political engagement. This is another important point that I wanted to stress because it's fundamental in order to understand how citizens participate today. So pervasiveness 2.0, just one figure. More than 60% of the world population use internet. There are about 4 or 5 billions of people that use internet. Can you imagine the impact of this? Not just in the everyday life, but also in the political realm. Of course, there are different levels of social penetration of the internet, but now the presence of the web and the use of the web is really widespread all over the world. Of course, there are different ideas about online democracy. There is an approach, an utopian approach, but there is also its opposite, because democracy is not just something for democracy. It's sometimes the digital communication, the digital tools are used by non-democratic government leaders in order to control the protester, for example. There are very interesting reports from Freedom House. The last one, Freedom on the Net 2019, had a very emblematic title, The Crisis of Social Media. And the subtitle stresses on the idea even more clearly. What was once a liberating technology has become a tool for surveillance and electoral manipulation. So internet is an ambiguous creature, is an ambiguous element that has to be considered with all its faces. We talked about public sphere, but I think it's much better to talk about public spheres in the plural, because the digital communication changed the levels, the opportunity, the spaces where to discuss, where to build a public opinion, where to form the idea about politics, and where to discuss collective issue in the everyday life of citizens. This makes the scenario much more fragmented, for example, much more liquid, for example, if you want to recall Bauman. And of course, the digital opportunities can be used also as a counterpower, especially in the age of distrust that affects the perspective of citizens in this period. Can be used as a tool to control, to monitor politics and is functioning. Last point, and I think is very important, is to go ahead the classical distinction between real world on one side and virtual world on the other. I think there is a strong connection, a strong contamination between online and offline. So there is just one world where these two realms are strictly connected, and where, for example, the online communication can foster offline participation and vice versa. So this is another point that I wanted to stress, and I try to explode in the chapters, in the following chapters that form the contents of my book. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you for this short, sorry for this, but very precise illustration of your research and the results that you wrote in your very recent book. That is, I understand it is quite new, not just a simple refrain, of course. I think that your keynote speech was very interesting because it's clear that, as I tried to say quickly at the beginning, our Jean Monnet module tried to put political research and law research at crossroads. We would like to investigate the citizenship through the lens of political, to the lens of politics and to the lens of law. And for this reason, we of course cannot avoid to consider that, as I told, the citizenship as a new allure in consideration of the European process of integration creates a new way to be a citizen also of, as I told at the beginning, of the European single market. European single market in which the European legislator, co-legislator, European Parliament, the Council, triggered by the initiative power of the European Commission, are trying to set a new framework related concerning all the online experience, political experience, citizens' experience, consumers' experience, and so on. For this reason, in our module, we have 2 sections devoted to the European laws and regulation. And I am particularly happy to have with us today Antonio Parenti, who leads the European Commission representation in Italy. Thank you, Antonio Parenti, for this to be with us. And that will explain us what, and I think how the European Commission is operating in this way, in this framework. But before to give the floor to Antonio Parenti, just a short introduction of him by my colleagues, Cristiana Carletti, who will teach with me and Luca Giordano in this module. Cristiana, the floor is yours. You have to unmute. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Now I hope that you can hear me very well. Good morning to all. Good morning to my colleagues, Professor Torino and Professor Germano, and to our teaching and research assistants, Claudia Mariotti, Claudio Di Maio, and Simone Cotura, and to our technical assistance officers, and for sure to all the students who are online this morning for this kickoff lecture of the Jean Monnet module on digital citizenship for the European Union. As Professor Torino has anticipated, after Professor Ceccarini, we have the pleasure to have today our second relevant speaker for this kickoff lecture, Mr. Antonio Parenti, highly experienced official with a 25 career path, mostly at the European institutions and in particular at and for the European Commission. I could only mention some relevant mandates he has charged in last years, testifying his outstanding knowledge and professional experience about the European framework, where the digital citizenship is positioned and could be considered, in our view, a key challenge nowadays for current times and for the future. He has been the head of the Trade and Economic Office of the Delegation of the European Commission in Moscow, then deputy head of the Unit for Trade Relations with the Far East, deputy chief negotiator for the European Union-Japan Free Trade Agreement, EU chief negotiator for the UN Global Compact on Migration, one of the main key challenges of the European Union in the field of migratory policies, minister counselor and head of the section for the economic trade and development at the delegation of the European Union at the United Nations in New York. And last but not least, 2 mandates of Mr. Parenti have been at the European External Action Service. And finally, since last June 2020, the head of the Italian representation of the European Commission here in Rome. This said, again, thank you very much, Mr. Parenti, for having accepted the invitation to join us today, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Professor Torino and to Roma for this invitation to discuss one of the most exciting and relevant issues these days on the agenda of the European Union, and I think on the agenda of many citizens. And a very warm welcome also on my own side to all the students that are listening to this lecture. Let me start by quoting someone who has nothing to do with the digital world, and maybe someone who's probably is going to put off some of the students, because I'll tell you my age with that, which is Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra used to sing a very famous song called My Way. And My Way, to a very large extent, is the way the European Union is trying to go on the digital world. You are very well aware that exist different type of models around the world on how to regulate the digital format, which is, let's say, moving from the one side, which is the American side of extreme freedom, extreme deregulation in the digital world, and another one, which is possibly what we say the Chinese model of excessive regulatory oversight of the system. The European Union is trying to find a different format for this, and it is doing it so at a very important moment, because when President von der Leyen took over the presidency of the European Commission in 2019, she was clearly saying, and then she repeated it at the State of the Union, first State of the Union in September last year, that we need a common plan for a digital Europe, which clearly define goals for 2030, such as for connectivity, skills, and digital public services. And we need to follow clear principles: the right to privacy and connectivity, freedom of speech, free flow of data, and cybersecurity. Let me now try to define and go through the main pieces of the legislation that the European Commission has drafted in this last year, and which explain how these principles are spelled in this legislation, and how all of this is going to be fundamental for achieving the Europe Digital Decade, which has basically just started. And the first point I would like to talk is data governance. The Commission has proposed, in fact, as you know, new rules on data governance, which will facilitate data sharing across the EU and between sector to create wealth for society, increase control and trust for both citizens and companies regarding their data, and offer an alternative European model to data handling practices in major platforms. This regulation will create the basis for a new European way of data governance that is in line with the EU values and principles, such as personal data protection, GDPR, consumer protection, and competition rules. This proposal includes a number of measures to increase trust in data sharing, as the lack of trust is currently a major obstacle and result in high costs. Measure to facilitate the reuse of certain data held by public sector. For example, the reuse of health data could advance the research and find cures for rare and chronic diseases. Means to give European control on the use of the data they generate by making it easier and safer for companies and individuals to voluntarily make their data available to the wider common good under clear conditions. As part of the European Digital Strategy, the European Commission then proposed two legislative initiatives: the Digital Service Act, DSA, and the Digital Market Act, or DMA. The DSA and DMA have two main goals. One is to create a safer digital space in which the fundamental right of all users of digital services are protected, and to establish a level playing field to foster innovation, growth, and competitiveness, both in the European single market and global. Let me take these two acts one by one. The Digital Service Act, or DSA, defines the responsibilities of all digital actors operating in Europe. It would improve content moderation on social media platforms to address online violence concern and risks. The DSA proposal maintains the current rule according to which companies that host other data are not liable for the content unless they actually know it is illegal. The DSA will introduce new obligation on platforms to disclose to the regulators how the algorithms are working, how decisions to remove content are taken, and on the way advertisers target users. Many of these provisions are only applied to platforms that have more than 45 million users in the European Union, so it will not apply to each and every platform. But platforms including Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok would meet this threshold and will be subject to the new obligations. And what is important, because of course any regulation that doesn't have penalties normally has no teeth, companies that do not comply with a new obligation will risk fines which will be up to 6% of the annual turnover. Now, let me move now to the Digital Market Act. The Digital Market Act is addressed specifically to the major companies, the big tech companies. In fact, it proposes that to classify certain platforms, for example, those with more than 45 million users, again, in Europe, including Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, as gatekeepers, and makes them subject to new obligation, which prevent large companies to abuse their market power and to allow smaller and new players to enter the market. As you know, this is a fundamental principle of European Union legislation, to allow new players in the market and avoid that big players seclude and segment the markets. So the key objective, or one of the key objectives, is to put an end to a practice called self-preferencing by companies like, for example, Google, which can display their products more prominently among the results of the Google search. Gatekeeper companies will also be prohibited to use people's personal data in other products. For example, Facebook could be restricted in using data obtained by its subsidiaries WhatsApp. Companies that do not comply, again, with the new obligation would risk fines up to 10% of their worldwide turnover. So not only the one applied happening in Europe, but worldwide. So the COVID-19, and I'm going towards my hand here, the COVID-19 crisis has shown us the protection of fundamental rights, and in particular, the right to privacy and personal data, is part of an effective policy responses in time of crisis, a precondition for ensuring the trust and uptake of technological solutions. And we could talk about this when it translates to vaccines for possibly another 3 or 4 seminars. The GDPR provides indeed for a flexible legal framework for data protection, which is fit for the purpose, provided the conditions and appropriate safeguards are in place, and business, including SME, now have the data, the set of data which can facilitate the business and which are very clear to the citizen. A citizen can also be made more aware, or are going to be made more aware of their rights. So we are at, if you want, at a forefront of a change in the European model of handling data and making sure that the digital world is not set aside of any regulation, or works and operates in a complete different environment, but it adheres to the principles of the European Union, the Charter of European Fundamental Rights, but above all that it works for the European business and European citizens. These were the goals that directed the legislator to make these proposals, and these are the goals that we would like to uphold in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Parenti. I think that you perfectly highlighted the main points that we will touch in our course, in our Monnet module, with respect to the future regulation of online services, online reliabilities, and I think that your speech, together with Luigi Ceccarini's speech, perfectly demonstrate the usefulness, we think, of our multidisciplinary course that has as main goal to link politics and law with respect the future development of online participation and online citizenship. Thank you indeed for this. Now, our first hour of lecture and first lesson of the course has ended. This is a communication for the students. Now we will see again in 15 minutes on our academic University of Roma 3 platform and Teams. I again would like to thank you, Antonio Parenti and Luigi Ceccarini, for their speeches, and I give just a few seconds to Luca, Germano, and Cristiana Carletti just to see if they would add something to our speakers. Luca, Cristiana.
I go first, ladies first. So thank you very much for both the contributions that have been relevant and that have covered, in my view, both conceptual overview of the issue that we are going to deepen during the module, the Germany module, and at the same time something that is more practical, as Mr. Parenti has said, that could link us for a very, again, practical view about the EU legislation and policy. So I think that both the relevant speakers have contributed very well to our kickoff lecture. Thank you very much to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of words to thank both contributions, and very interesting, very rich, and very important for us for our module. Just this. Thank you very much.
So at this point we can say goodbye to the next time. We are writing among us that all us, we hope to see each other live, not online, and we think that we will overcome this bad situation in next future. Thank you, and say again, bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.